does. Yay, we're live. It's telling me we're live.
I
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Eppy, and this is Loren Peterson, and we're going to do Loren teaches Eppy about beer. I am familiar with beer, but I am not a beer expert by any stretch. Loren, if you'd like to introduce yourself, just beforehand I found out that you used a word, a first level.
Cicerone. Yeah.
I don't know what that is, and I'd love to learn more.
Let's dive right in. Hi, everyone. I'm Loren, Loren Peterson. And so in the beer world, Cicerone is, I guess in layman's terms, the equivalent to a sommelier.
Okay.
But we have fewer levels, and they're not nearly as intense. So I'm a level 1 Cicerone, which they call a certified beer server. My cat is attacking my arm. But the test for the Cicerone covers a wide array of styles, draft systems, how to brew beer, kind of like it's more than just your basic entry level, but it's not so crazy advanced that you have to smell a beer and know exactly what style it is and where it came from. But I am studying for my level 2, so I have been doing quite a bit of that, which is a lot of fun.
That's exciting.
I have been in and out of, not totally in and out of, but transferring back and forth between like distribution and sales and hospitality on the alcohol and beer side for pretty much since I turned 21. I worked in beer sales, and then I went to a beer bar, and now currently what I do is I am a draft systems technician. So all of the systems in bars that you're seeing, the tap towers, I service and maintain those all throughout South Orange County. And I'm friends with a ton of home brewers and professional brewers as well. So we talk beer and drink beer a lot.
So you brought up home brewing. I'm gonna put a disclaimer here. My beer background, aside from having drunk beer, but I drink beer almost entirely out of ignorance. I buy my beer based on the fantasy art on the labels.
That's an awesome way to buy beer, honestly.
Yeah. But I did. I'm going to do some math here real quick. I did about 20 years ago. I made an attempt at home brewing. I tried to make a coffee stout, and I did make some. It was, in fact, an alcoholic drink.
Okay.
It tasted like an ashtray, but we finished it because there was something. I think probably the accident I made was improving how much alcohol or how much coffee was supposed to go into it or whatever.
It might have had too much. It came out real overpowering, real burnt.
Yeah. It was definitely a thing where when you took your first sip of it, you're like, this is god awful. But by the time you were done, you were reaching for another one, and you were like caught between two different kinds of buzzes, like that was an experience.
Awesome.
But that's the extent of it. I don't know, like, I don't know what a Pilsner is. I don't know what any of those, a lager.
I homebrewed myself a while back, and it was a travesty as well. And I'm friends with several brewers, and they all laugh at me because of how awful I did. But I really enjoy like different styles, but also the historical context of beer. So if you're talking like lager, beer is sort of broken down into two main categories. You have your lagers and your ales. All beer is going to fall under one of those two categories. Like there might be like a couple outliers, especially because regulations have changed now. But the primary difference is the temperature at which they're fermented and the yeast they use. And that's really the difference between ales and lagers. So you have like Pilsners, which are lagers, and stouts, which are ales. And then you can get into the really fiddly stuff where you have like California Common, which by all accounts, I think should be an ale, but is a lager instead. And then Baltic Porters, which should be ales, but are lagers. I might be wrong in the California Common one. I know it's one of the reverse, but Baltic Porters are a lager when normally porters are ales. So it's there's all this taxonomy that goes into it that we could talk about for hours.
So, I mean, if it's about, if I may, if it's about the how it's made, I mean, obviously, how beer is made is going to affect its taste.
Oh, absolutely.
But can you be like, oh yeah, I'm just a lager person, or
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I drink both, but generally 9 times out of 10, I'll take a lager over an ale. They
oh,
tend
okay.
to be lighter. They tend to be crisper, a little more bready and biscuity,
Mm-hmm.
and not as big and heavy. And that's not to say there aren't bigger, heavier lagers, and there aren't lighter, crisper ales. But for the most part, they're going to fall on those sides of the spectrum. Ales are going to be fruitier, a bit heavier. Lagers, lighter, crisper, a little more bready.
Okay.
I would go for a Pilsner almost any day of the week over anything else. It's just my personal favorite.
Right. Yeah, that's and okay. So the terminology. So a stout is an ale, though, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. Generally speaking, that's
Generally speaking, yeah. I don't know of any that are considered lagers, but again, I don't know every single style that's out there right now. But I think pretty much all stouts are ales.
And then something else that I was just this year introduced to, and I'm sure it's got a long and storied history, but is the sour beers.
Oh yeah, sours.
Yeah.
Sours are great. They started getting really popular a couple years ago. And essentially what they are is beer that has been spoiled. They have bacteria, certain yeast strains, such as lactobacillus or pediococcus, a couple others that have been introduced to the beer, and it sours it, which generally is like not a good thing, but somehow they taste great.
Yeah.
They're really fruity. They're a lot like wine in many respects. They tend to be lighter and bubbly and crisp, and have these really great fruit notes, and then sour. And it's sometimes it can range from being lightly acidic, like some wines even are, all the way down to like you just drank a glass of like Warhead juice. And I've had some of those that just you have like a couple sips and your throat is just ravaged. And some people like it. I can't handle that end of the spectrum, but I love sours for the most part. And sours has also come to encompass this more like they're spontaneously fermented beers. So instead of putting yeast in, you just let the yeast that's naturally in the air get in the beer and start propagating and fermenting. So that tends to go towards these funky, wild beers that can get soured because you have, bad yeast or good now in the air. Or they can come out very farmhousey is the hi Jen description. Sometimes they taste like or even smell like a horse blanket or hay. Barnyard is the descriptor we use, barnyard. And I think they're great, but I know people who are like, I don't want to drink something that smells like the state fair. And it's so true. It does. It absolutely.
Yeah. There is a quick question about the sours. So sours can be either ales or lagers, right? Like that's or
my knowledge of sours is not too expansive, but yes, it can because they use wild yeast, so it can just be this combination of whatever's in there. And so they some do sort of, now that sours have become much more commercialized, have dialed it in and been like, all right, cool, we're pitching this yeast in. But a lot of the old stuff started basically, these people were brewing in these abbeys or churches, massive breweries that they had in the old countrysides, and all of the yeast would get stuck in the air in there, and it would propagate, create its own strain, and that's why theirs tasted as unique as it did. They were just brewing, and then the yeast got in because they didn't know what yeast was.
Yeah. I was going to ask if this is like, if it's like incredibly regional, then if that's if they're just pulling it out of the air, like
it's very regional. A lot of the sours really come from a lot of the original sour styles are from France and Belgium.
Interesting.
And it's just all of these old family-owned breweries that were making beer that way. That's just how they made it, and it's sour. And now that we've got modern science and we're able to dial it in and figure it out, we can replicate it. But at the time, it was just regional stuff. I think a lot of them were in coastal areas because it had something to do with the wind, and all the stuff the wind would carry in. But that one's more for that question, and in that regard, is more for someone who's really studied the Belgian.
Yeah.
Louis Pasteur, he was a French brewer who did a lot of sour stuff, and because he was yeast and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's very interesting how all these styles just sort of developed from different areas and different regions. And a lot of the styles we do have, when you break it down even further from ales and lagers, can be traced to very specific areas. And a lot of the times it was made because, well, this is what we have on hand, and this is the temperature we've got. But really it boiled down to their water, because most of beer is water. And that's going to affect the taste based on region.
That's that's interesting too. I hadn't thought about that. The because I often think of foodstuffs as like the water going into it is close to distilled as possible, just because of it's being filtered through. But I guess that wouldn't actually be the case. I just was imagining that in my head.
So you can do it that way. There are some people who do. I mean, I'm assuming, brewing with distilled water is going to create a very specific taste. You want those impurities in there to get different tastes out. And there are a couple brewers I know, and I think it's become much, much more common since I first heard about it. They have these big tanks that they use, and they completely distill the water down, strip all the chemicals out of it, and then add back in what they need to specific flavors, or emulate water from other regions so that they can brew highly specific styles that require that water.
Yeah, that's there's a lot of interesting chemistry going on there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's funny because a lot of the brewers I know, it's like, well, we're not actually like we're not brewers, we're chemists who brew beer.
Right.
So a lot of modern breweries have like full-on chemical labs in them with just all sorts of fancy sterilized equipment, and it's just not what you expect when you get on the inside. That this typical, especially in fantasy, we have this this like idealized, there's just a bunch of kegs everywhere, and surf up with a mash paddle, and then boom, you get beer. It doesn't work that way anymore at all. But it's become a very highly scientific field.
That's really cool. So I had a question about farmhouse. Right, I remember what it was. So there's I think it's an ale. I think they call it a farmhouse ale here that a local brewer makes. That was one of the few things that I've latched onto and said, this is a thing I enjoy. Mm-hmm. So you described farmhouse as I forgot what
some farmhouses are spontaneously fermented.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking, they came predominantly from France. They were these ales and lagers, because you can kind of go either way with the farmhouse, but they would age them and sort of leave them to ferment, and then like drink them after the harvest season. And they tend to be really kind of on the lighter side, not super heavy. Mm-hmm. Tend to go from like dry and crisp to a bit fruity and a bit barnyardy or funky, depending on the brewer. I love farmhouse ales. We got a great brewery out here that makes one that's just it comes in like these big old like brown bottles with a cork that's got a wire around it. They're called Lost Abbey, so everything looks kind of like old biblical, like Renaissance era biblical art.
Yeah,
it's fantastic. So that's kind of their whole motif, but their farmhouse ale is fantastic.
I mean, like, that is one thing that with the microbrews and everything like that. Like I said, I'm almost always just attracted to the labels. And just seeing how that stuff has kind of grown up recently. I'm assuming recently. I mean, it could just be I'm just taking notice recently, but like
past, I don't know, 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Probably about 10, 15 years. It's been kind of going that way. Because before that, like craft beer, as they call it now, was really isolated in pockets and didn't have huge distribution networks, and you pretty much only had the big guys out there. Yeah. So doing weird label art was like kind of a thing. I think like Three Floyds did a lot of it in the beginning, because they have like a beer called Dark Lord that just has like a Death Knight on it, and that has like a leaf living dead, and oh yeah, they're great beers. And you've got all these other ones that are starting to name their beers after like weird stuff. There's one out there called Abraxas, and I think Abraxas was a dragon in Middle Eastern myth.
Oh, could be
of some sort. I don't know. I used it as the name of a dragon in my first 4th edition campaign.
I think there's a Jesse the Body Ventura film called Abraxas.
Oh. Which is, so it's out there somewhere in the site. So they've started to take these. A lot of them take very mythical, or especially like there's this weird correlation with stouts and like making the label for your stout look like a metal album cover. There's a particular brewery that we have down here that like everything is just like Viking themed, and it's like Odin's blood and Thor's hammer and ridiculous stuff like that, and it's all in that weird spiky script that metal bands use. It's so like totally on brand.
That's great. The oh wait, I had something. Well, if you got something, keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt there. I was just...
Before we started this, we kind of spoke a little about vegan beer, because you're a vegan.
Yes.
So yeah, vegan beer. I worked at Whole Foods for a time, and it surprised me how many people didn't know that like not all beer was vegan.
Yeah, I mean, like beer is one of those food stuff, one of those things you consume that doesn't have to label its ingredients.
Yep.
And then I know that quite often is it isinglass?
Yep. Isinglass is the big one, and then I'd say the second most prominent, and which isinglass, when you explain to people, go, yeah, it's a gel made or derived from the swim bladders of fish, and of course they assume bladder, okay, urine, but no, it's swim bladders are what they inflate to float.
Yeah.
And so it's this gel, and it's not in your beer. They put it on top of the tank, and it floats to the bottom, or the opposite, sinks to the bottom, and captures all the impurities and sits at the bottom, and then they drain the beer off from on top of that, so there's no impurities in it. So yeah, the isinglass does touch the beer, but it's not in your beer. And explaining that to people these days is just like, they hear bladder and they run screaming. And then the other big one is honey.
And I know some vegans are okay with honey and some aren't, but it's good to know where it is and when it shows up.
So in terms of that, there are a couple easy ways to check and make sure that your beer is vegan. I think one of the easiest is most German beer will be, specifically if it says brewed. A lot of them kind of take this as a set of pride. It's brewed under the German purity law, the Reinheitsgebot, which, if I may have butchered the hell out of that, it specifically states that your beer can only have 4 ingredients: water, hops, malt, yeast, and that's it. So if it's brewed under that, then there's nothing else in it. I think that does allow for certain flavoring agents, like you can throw in coriander and orange peel and stuff like that. But those are your products. The other is there are some breweries now who are labeling the sides of their cans or bottles saying this beer is vegan. Modern Times, in particular, they label all the ones that are vegan. So anything that's labeled as a milk stout, obviously, would be. There's not actual milk in it, but they do put lactose in them. And I don't know how that kind of ends up on the vegan spectrum. But I very well could not be vegan.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the ones that like you can get it not vegan, but like there's no guarantee anyone's gone through the trouble. Or I get it vegan, I mean, rather.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, like I find myself quite often standing with my phone open and searching on the names of things. Like, hello, internet. Tell me what's going on here.
Lately, though, a lot of breweries are if they're vegan, they're proud of that fact, and they're putting it. The Modern Times is a big one. Got the hat. I'm not.
Nice.
They don't pay me to do this. I really big fan. So they're a big one that does vegan. I want to say Sierra Nevada is both completely green and vegan.
I think so. I mean, again, I would encourage people to check the internet, but I think that's one of the ones that I remember.
They're really, really big on being green and lowering their carbon footprint as much as they can, and they're one of the biggest breweries, which is great. So they're kind of paving that path, or at least leading the charge. And then as far as what to avoid, that's harder.
Yeah.
Because you never know. Like I said, they don't have to label it. One of the easiest things you can avoid is anything labeled as a braggot.
Okay.
A braggot uses both malt and honey as a fermented by style. It's an old medieval style of beer. And so it's like it's people call it a hybrid between a mead and a beer, and it's very much true. It's very much a marriaging of those two styles, or two alcohols. So that's an easy one to avoid. And then I would think anything that says unfiltered, you should be good with.
Okay.
Because they're not using the isinglass.
Yeah.
Most breweries have stopped using it. There's a few I know of that I was talking to the brewers, and they're like, yeah, we couldn't get the taste right unless we use the isinglass. And that's our only beer that we use it on.
Right.
So most of the time, your bartender, if you're at a brewery, the brewery bartender would know. Or usually you can get it with a quick Google. But yeah, it's kind of strange how, like, you don't think about, beer wouldn't have animal products in it, but it totally does. It totally does.
I know that, like, and I don't know where anything landed with this, but I remember for years there was like this. I've been vegan for a while, so in the early days of the Wild West internet, there was like, they would be like, Guinness is, or Guinness is absolutely is not, and they would go back and forth on the internet, and I just remember those, like, having those days where eventually I just gave up and didn't. I was like, whatever. I can go back and check. I'm sure today I would know for sure, but back in those days, it was
now you could definitely get a definitive on it. And I honestly don't know about Guinness.
Yeah,
on that one.
So is the, like, I was going to ask about pouring beers, because I remember at some point somebody told me that there was a correct way to do it. And absolutely. May have demonstrated it, but then I have since forgotten. So
there's a couple ways to pour beer, and there's actually so the primary, the one that most people use. I've got a perfect example. Is 45-degree angle on the glass, and you pour in, and then once it hits about 75% full, you level off.
Okay.
And what that'll do is prevent it from just being all head, but it still builds up enough head, because the head is releasing aromatics. It's preventing the beer from going flat. You want that head in there.
Oh, okay. I did not know that, actually.
Some bars will pour you all the way up to the top, and it doesn't, like, yeah. But you want about that much, because it's going to help release all those aromatics and all those flavors, and it sort of prevents more gas from escaping.
So is that the reason for that bulge in the glass? Because that is like a design and style that I recognize.
The bulge, so this is called a no-nick pint, and that bulge is there because when you put glasses in each other, when you stack them in restaurants, sometimes they get stuck and you have to twist and chip or nick. This prevents them from nicking, because this top will hit that bubble and nothing below will actually touch the other glass. So it's called a no-nick pint. It's a very iconic, but it's really just efficiency.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. I like
that's put there now as like a gauge, because that's about how much head you do want. Another method of pouring beer, and I see this one very rarely. I do it myself at home a lot because I really like how it turns out, is you take the beer and you hold the glass straight and just pour. And you're going to get a huge bloom of head, and it'll be all foam, but you back off. So it's about a third full, and let it die, and you do it again and again and again until it's full and you got everything out, and you get this really big, beautiful, like biscuity, pillowy. It looks like straight out of a cartoon,
Right.
like bubble of head on top. And I find that it works best with if you're using like certain chemical soaps. They prevent head from forming or cause it to dissipate really quick. But that method kind of fixes that.
Oh, okay.
And certain beers, I do it mostly with German stuff because I really like the aromatics on those, and that bigger head's going to give you more aromatics. And then the final pouring method is the nitro beers, or predominantly Guinness. I see so many people, they go up, they stick the thing under, they pour it all the way to the top, and then just hand it to you. And nitro beers don't work that way. They have this sort of cascading bubble effect, and you're supposed to pour them to about halfway full and let it sit until all the bubbles rise to the top, and then do it again. Because otherwise it doesn't taste right. It doesn't get the right mouth feel. And so I don't know if you have this over on the East Coast, but here we've got several bars that have these stickers in the window that say like Guinness certified pouring server or whatever.
Yeah.
We know how to pour a Guinness. And I've been to multiple bars where, they'll just throw it, bloop, you're good. But I went to a bar in Portland to watch this Irish folk band that I like play. And it's just outside of Portland, I think in, God, I don't remember. It's this tiny city, like right out of Portland. And I ordered a Guinness and didn't get it for like 12 minutes because they were sitting there pouring it, little by little by little. And it was great. I mean, it was the best Guinness I've ever had.
That's a very interesting. Yeah, because it's a thing that you don't think about with drinks in general. I mean, like you probably do if you think about alcoholic drinks, where it's partly presentation, but also like how it interacts. I know about things like bruising the alcohol when the ice melts too much and things like that. I mean, that's literally all I know about it. But like,
it's more than most people. Most people think, like, the shaken versus stirred thing.
Yeah,
and James Bond was like a joke, but like, well, at the time, no, there was a different. I mean, still, there's a difference in how it's done. It can, if you shake too hard, you'll bruise the alcohol. If you stir too long, you get too much water.
I will say this, that probably the best beer I ever had was when I was tubing on a river.
Nice.
and a free can of beer just floated by. And I think this is gonna just sound horrible, but I think it was a Coors Light even. But like it was such a hot day, and so
that's the perfect time for it.
Yeah, it was just like, oh, free beer. But it was right out of the can, which is like, do you lose a lot not pouring it out into a pint? I guess is what I'm asking.
On a Coors Light, no.
No, yeah, okay.
They don't have a ton of aromatics, but yeah, if you don't pour it out, you're not going to get much aromatics out of that.
Yeah.
You smell. I mean, especially when you're drinking, none of that's going to hit your nose. So yeah, you lose some, but again, it depends on style. If the style is not very aromatic, you're not going to lose a lot. But if it is, yeah, you're going to lose everything.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But sometimes a cold beer out of a can is just
right. Yeah.
There was a trend that started. I don't know when it started, but it got real popular. I think last year, everyone was doing shower beers. You get hot shower, cold can of beer, and there's some chemical response where I'm hot on the outside, but this beer is bringing my internal temperature back down. That's supposed to feel real great, but everyone was doing cans because the last thing you want to do is drop a glass in your shower.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, these people, they weren't like they were taking a shower and then getting out and drinking the beer. They were drinking it in the shower.
Yeah, absolutely. I tried it. It was great. I mean, it was an experience for sure. But there's like exactly like hot day, tubing down the river, cold beer. There's something about that combination of elements that just makes it so much better.
I have to say, this is a little window into my own private life, but like I was telling you also before this that my wife and I were looking at houses right now, and the house we just looked at earlier today had a sauna in it,
Mm.
or sauna, or however the Finnish. But that, like, now that you say that, I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I can
That's
see that.
uh-huh.
And I could definitely see like the hot shower being the, like, this is what you got to make that happen, so let's make that happen.
Yeah,
That's
it's a strange. At first, I was like, I came out of the bathroom with a beer in my hand. My girlfriend was like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I'm like, "Yeah, shower beer. It's all the rage."
I have this is not beer, but it's a drink recipe that I share from time to time with people, and this is on par with that. And I do this on road trips all the time. But iced coffee, which I need on a road trip to stay awake so I don't die. You get iced coffee, black, and original flavored Trident. And I'm going to tell you, it's fucking amazing.
I'm on board.
Yeah, because original flavored Trident is just like, I think it's supposed to be like, I think it's cinnamon and mint together, I think is what the flavor is. It's a weird flavor. It just reminds me of like the half a piece of gum that an aunt would give me when I was a kid. Like, it's not a thing that I'm like, this is the best gum ever, but it goes back and forth between cinnamon and mint in your like while you're chewing it, and then you take a drink of that coffee, and the sort of spectrum of flavors that it goes through, from coffee to like rich chocolate. It's amazing, and it's so weird because it's such a like.
I'm gonna have to try that. I'm a huge iced coffee fan, so that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's that's my secret recipe. That's how I get through long drives. But yeah, it's a good thing. So I got another question for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I enjoy cooking quite a bit, and I like to incorporate beer in my cooking. But I suspect, and I don't know if you have good answers to this, but I suspect that some beers are like, what I generally do is just cheap beers in my cooking, because I don't want to have like a really good expensive beer and then, well, maybe, I don't know, like, but generally my thought process has been, oh, I've got some cheap beer, I'll just try that out. I think also because a lot of times the expensive beers have distinctive flavors that may not work as like a food stuff. But
so one of my favorites is I'll usually, me and some buddies will get together on a summer afternoon, and we'll pick up a 6-pack of an amber ale we really like, and we make a big pot of chili, and we toss a bottle of that in.
Nice.
And I know people who are like, oh yeah, we put beer in our chili, and they put in like Bud Light, and Bud Light is so all those like lower end, you know, what would be, they're called American light lagers, the Budweiser, the Bud Light. They don't use malt for the most part. They use corn. To get their sugar. So they taste a little like corn, a little like watery, like they taste like watery popcorn to me.
Yeah.
Still, on a hot day, it can be the best thing ever.
Yeah.
And so when you throw that in the beer, it doesn't, to me, I'm like, okay, this tastes like someone poured beer in my chili. But the amber ales tend to have this nice, a little more roasty malt flavor, sometimes orange, sometimes chocolate, depending on the one you get, sometimes nutty. And so we usually pick one that's kind of like got a mild, not overpowering flavor, but not no flavor at all. And we toss a bottle of that in our chili. And ever since, it's just been the best chili we've ever had. The French actually have an entire style of cooking called bière de cuisine. I know very little about it other than that it exists. I don't know what you do with it. I've made Scotch ale ice cream, which was amazing. And then soaked bratwurst in a
classic
Fest or a Pilsner. And then what else have I done? I've never made my own fish and chips, but beer battered fish and chips are always better than non-beer battered fish and chips to me.
Interesting.
And I like those are the main ones I can think of. Beer ice cream is fantastic, and beer chili, which
I've had beer floats
Yeah. Beer floats are great.
been amazing. Yeah. Yeah, there's just something about like I very much enjoy bitter drinks. I don't like again like with the coffee and whatnot, but
I'm a huge fan of bitter. I drink Campari straight, and my girlfriend thinks I'm insane. And of Amaros and coffee and
yeah.
IPAs, which are really bitter. Anything bitter, I'm all for.
So let's talk a little bit about those four ingredients. Well, I mean, we've talked a little bit about water and a little bit about yeast, but there's hops and malt, right?
Yes.
So what are hops?
Hops are the female cone flower of the hop plant. I'm not a botanist, but
Okay.
essentially they look like tiny pine cones.
Mhm.
They're green. They're flowers. They're related to hemp. And they are essentially they're what give you this bitter flavor in IPAs because they use a lot of them. But they're thrown into the beer, pre-boil, post-boil, whenever you do it. Depending, I know brewers who do it all various stages. But it adds flavors based on the kind of hop. So some add earthy elements, some add citrus, some add more fruity, not necessarily just citrus fruit, and some add floral. And it's really just a flavoring agent.
Mhm.
But also it, if I remember correctly, is a preservative. And that's one of the main reasons they were used back when beer was, starting to get it was coming up back in, I think Middle Ages is right around when we started throwing hops into our beer. And it acted as a preservative and it made it taste good. And
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, because the thing about hops that I guess surrounds it a little bit in mystery is that it's something that I am not familiar with in any other food stuff. And
I don't know of any other food stuff it's used in.
Yeah, so that is kind of interesting because that feels unique in the world of food. Like I think if it's used somewhere else, then it's probably used in two things, right? Like anything I could think of that I would, like I was just thinking about we were talking about chili, and I have my peppers in my garden are in, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to make some chili, and I'm going to get this amber ale. But then, like you throw chili peppers in some beers, right? Like that's yes.
And when it comes to hops, like I know I've seen hopped wine, hopped
Mhm.
cider, and hopped mead. I've seen hopped whiskey and hopped vodka. But really, that all stemmed from IPAs got popular at some point. And so, like, I don't know. They're extremely bitter on their own.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just pop a hop in your mouth and eat it. I guess you could, but I don't think it would taste great. And so, like, I don't know what they're used for aside from flavoring agents and alcohol, predominantly beer.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything else you'd really use hops for because when you cook them, they get really, really bitter.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of why that's why beer's bitter because they put the hops in it, IPAs. But they're really not great for much else as far as I know.
And the malts, that's like a
grain.
Yeah.
So malt is really one of the biggest, widest sets in there that you have to work with. Your water is probably going to be local, and you got a lot of different hops you can use. And your yeast at the time was going to be pretty much whatever was in the air. But malt is you can grow all sorts of different kinds of wheat and rye and all these different kinds of malt, and they all have different uses and different flavors. But the predominant use for that is when you boil it, that causes the sugars to come out.
Yeah.
That the yeast can eat the sugar, ferment it into alcohol. And that's really their main use. But once you get it dialed in, once we get on the chemistry side and oh, this beer tastes like this because they use this malt side, then people, kind of figure out what to do with it. You have all these options for malts. But beyond that, you get what they call adjuncts. And adjuncts it kind of has this weird dual-sided nature in the beer world because, like, you could say adjunct to mean Oh yeah, they brew with adjuncts. They use like corn. They don't even use malt, so it's not that good.
Oh,
Or
okay.
oh yeah, they use adjuncts. So in addition to brewing with, malt and wheat, they threw something else in there to get more sugar out of it.
Hmm.
And so like it kind of has that, or any other flavoring agent. There are some that'll throw cinnamon in, and that's in some circles considered an adjunct, even though it's just an additional flavor. I've heard it used both ways. And, like some places will be like, oh, we do malt and we do honey, and that's an extra fermentable because you're going to get more sugar out of it. Some places will just do malt. So that now has boiled down to style of beer and really what you're trying to make. But originally it was just malt. You throw some wheat in from the field or whatever, or rye or whatever it is you have, and that's where you get your sugar.
Interesting. Yeah, because I remember when I did the home brewing thing, I think it had me just throw sugar in as well. But
Yeah.
I suspect that's just part of the like prepackaged, like
it was like a prepackaged bit.
Yeah.
It would not surprise me at all because the yeast needs sugar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if it was like a weaker yeast strain, one that doesn't have what they call attenuation, which is how much of that sugar it can convert into alcohol. Weaker yeast strains can't convert. They don't have as much attenuation, can't convert as much sugar, so the beer is going to be sweeter coming out the other end. Because there's still sugars left. Stronger ones, it's going to be more alcoholic coming out the other end because it's converted more of that sugar. So if that had like a strong yeast strain that they threw in and you needed that sugar to actually, so you didn't end up with a bunch of sugar left over or whatever, I don't know what was going on there, but that's that's interesting. Pouring straight sugar in. I know people who have done candy. There was a brewery near me that made a peach ring sour. They took those old like little plastic baggies rings, and they threw them in, and it was so good. It tasted exactly like those peach rings. They were delicious. And we were hanging out in the brewery one day, and they pulled the peach rings out of the tank, and we were, all right, we're gonna try them. They were god awful.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, that's yeah, I'm trying to remember, like, because I remember they wanted me to put sugar in the bottle before I bottled it, I think is.
Oh, putting sugar. Okay.
I mean, I think there was sugar in both stages, but I suspect what it was is like the prepackaged, like a cake mix, right? Like,
yeah,
it's like, oh, and you have this ingredient around the house, so we're just going to make it so you can add that as well, or
gotcha,
or what have you.
Yeah, but 20 years ago, I'm betting homebrew kits weren't exactly on the up and up.
No, it was a lot of plastic. It made the house smell like a goddamn brewery, which at the time my roommate was not a fan of, but he did drink that damn beer. So I'm just saying, that's
free beer, right?
Yeah. I had another question that I was gonna ask you that I blanked on, and I was gonna actually mention that there's a beer commercial, but that is very near and dear to my heart. I again choose my beers based on my labels, but this one was like a commercial from the 80s for a beer, and it was like this entire sword and sorcery. Like it starts with like a barbarian warrior riding on a back of some sort of panther through a desert, heading to a temple with lasers and whatnot. And I cannot remember the name or anything about it. But like earlier today, I was like, oh, I got to mention that commercial. So I did. I've done my duty.
I would buy that beer.
I don't think it exists anymore. Otherwise, I would do it. I think I even remember seeing or reading about the people who did the commercial, and it was just like the guy who owned the brewing company just really enjoyed sword and sorcery, and he was like, do this, and they're like, all right, I don't know how that sells a beer, but like I remember in my youth hams, which
I love hams.
Oh, okay. So is it still around?
I don't know if it like came back or if I just never knew it was a thing, but as far as like cheap beer goes, hams is my favorite hands down. the Ralph's next to me sells like, they only sell it in like 24 packs.
Yeah.
So we grab like a 24 pack of hams, and you know, like 5 or 6 of us will just be like, all right, we're gaming this weekend. Like, crack open some cans. So that is our go-to cheap beer because it's so good for what you're paying.
I need to try it because when I was a kid, the commercials for it were cartoons, like a cartoon bear, and like it had this jingle, and it was just very like, it looked like it was advertising to children. And of course, my parents, like, I'd be like, I want this, whatever this is. And my parents are like, well, you're too young for it. There's, you know, they were reasonable about it. So I never, you know, when I got to drinking age, I had forgotten about it and then was reminded of it. So I'll have to give it, I have to look for it now. I thought it had disappeared. I thought it had gone the way. Yeah. There's like a lot of beer that I remember being around in my youth, like Schlitz was another one.
I don't know if Schlitz is around anymore, but I know like it's kind of a weird. Like, there's a bar I really love out in Portland called Cerveza, and they have all this like old Schlitz merchandise like everywhere.
Yeah,
it's all over the bar, like posters and mugs and cups and little like the little Schlitz mascot guy like holding a sign that says Schlitz, and it's just all over the place there. It's great. I've never actually seen a bottle or a can, so I don't know. But
growing up in the Midwest, there was like 1 out of every 5 households had a beer can collection in the basement. Like that was just the like just tiny little shelves lining the walls, just various beer cans. It was just how you decorated your basement. Wood paneling, small shelves with just enough depth to have a beer can on it, and then just beer cans. So yeah, Schlitz. I like any Midwestern German name was a beer, like, you know, Schmitty's, you know, anything like that would be up on those walls.
And there were so many breweries back in the early 1900s. The reason so many of them fell off and we have such big ones now is because of World War II.
Oh, really?
And it was like this combination of like they had to ration the malt, and Budweiser and the big guys had cans, so they could ship it overseas. So right. Malt ration. And as a result, a lot of others had to close or got bought up.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Coming out of that, they were powerhouses, and anyone else who tried to enter the market, you know, capitalism ran its course.
Right.
But now there was this sort of like resurgence in the craft, which was championed by a couple of small guys. My mind immediately goes to Stone, who is no longer small. But you know, when they started, it was just Greg Koch brewing in his dorm, brewing beer in his dorm, and now they're like one of the biggest in the world. So
when would you say that started roughly? That resurgence there.
So for me, that resurgence in the U.S. probably happened in the 80s, late 80s. I mean, someone out there is going to kill me for saying that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So probably like the late 80s is when like that started kind of rolling back, but it really hit its stride, I think, the early 2000s.
Yeah. I feel like the early 2000s for almost everything. I mean, like, obviously, looking at your the wall of games behind you, and you know, if you know of me and found me on the internet, it's probably because of role-playing games.
I found you because of Swords Without Master.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, that's great.
By the way, my friend loves Dread. I've played Dread. I played Dread at a time where I was more interested in the game than who made it, and now it's the exact like I'm really interested in designers right now, and all my friends are like, oh, I follow the cast of Critical Role, and I'm like, cool, follow these other people because you learn a lot more from them. No, I found you through Swords Without Master because I kind of really fell into Sword and Sorcery a little while back.
Yeah,
got really tired of people being. There's this thing like in the mainstream where everyone talks about Sword and Sorcery as if in order to be Sword and Sorcery, someone has to have a sword and someone has to cast a spell, and boom, right. Sorcery. And like, no, Lord of the Rings is not Sword and Sorcery to me, anyways. Like, that's like heroic fantasy, which Sword and Sorcery can also be, but regardless, somebody was tweeting about how they said the thing is her name Naja?
Oh yeah, yes.
Yeah. She was tweeting. I don't even remember how I started following her. But she was tweeting saying, the thing I love about Swords Without Master is I can do anything I want from like the Lord of the Rings style, but without any of the like overbearing problems that are present in Lord of the Rings. To butcher and paraphrase that tweet, I was like, "Cool, what's this?" And I googled it, and I'm like, "This is amazing!" And just reading it, I immediately fell in love with that game, and I think I'm gonna try and get in on it. Gauntlet Con.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
That's my plan, but Fraser Simons is also running his new game, Never Knows Best, so might go for that.
Well, this okay. So I forget what the point I was originally going to make.
And we went off on a tangent.
Yeah. Oh, I think it was just that like 2000 is when like a lot of things exploded as far as like smaller companies being able to do things for obvious reasons. Like technology's made advertising and distribution easier and whatnot. But the what I was going to say is that I've played a Swords Without Master game in a local like pub. It was like a higher end pub kind of thing where everybody's eidolon was the beer that they ordered.
That's amazing.
It was
that is fantastic.
And it was impromptu because we were in there and like we were saying before about the labels and whatnot, we were just looking through their drink list, and some of these names, we were joking that these names alone were great rogues, and I had dice in my pocket and pulled them out, and we just went for it. And
that's incredible.
Yeah,
that is an experience.
Yeah,
that's awesome. That's now I want to do that.
Yeah, it's there's just something like also very much along the same lines. We ran a LARP based on Swords Without Master. This is a while ago. I won't be able to do the math in my head. But for instead of an eidolon, what we did is we had people tell us the name of the drink from their homeland, and then we couldn't provide alcohol, but we created a fake tavern, and then just had a bunch of sugar waters of various kinds, like so that like nobody's allergies were tripped or anything like that. But there are like this one is the milk of wolves, and this one is brewed dragon's blood or whatever anybody said, which was one of the greatest like central points to a game. Like it was perfect because they could go out, they could do whatever they want, but they would always come back to this table that we had set up to say, hey, this is the tavern, and pick up, hear what stories other people are doing, and pick up and be like, this is the drink from my homeland, and share it with people and whatnot. And there's just something wonderful about that I want like we're way on a tangent here, but like I think
it's a good little side tangent. It's still relevant here.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I think that like thematic hospitality works really well with games, and it's not a thing we kind of explore too terribly. Yeah, like again, like if you go to a board game, I went to a board game once where they're like, we're gonna play Civilization, and you're gonna come in the morning, and we're gonna stay until late in the evening, and we're just going to play it. So, but we're also going to cater it, and it's all going to be food that can be found in the cradle of civilization, right? So this is awesome. Right? Like that's if you're going to provide me food, I'm happy no matter what. But if you're going to then make it part of a theme, and that's good stuff. And I feel like if you've got a group that's willing to enjoy and can enjoy alcohol, like having a themed beer or whatever set up can really add to the whole experience.
There was a game I ran recently of Blades in the Dark by John Harper, and my group had to go to a party and play party games with the elite because they were trying to rob them, and they got in as guests. And one of the games that the elite played was cocktail hour, and there was a ton of cocktails, and your team is given a slip of paper that lets you know there's the garnish on the cocktail. You have 2 garnishes that you know are poisoned. And there's enough for everybody. So the whole thing was you go around in teams and you pick a drink for your team, and then you're supposed to mingle, and you know what's poisoned. So you have to try and force poisoned drinks onto other people, and you can get them to swap. Sort of like a white elephant gift sort of thing. Once I think it's swapped 3 times, it can't be swapped again. And then at the end of the night, or as dinner begins, if your team comes with a poison drink, it wasn't like poison, oh, you're gonna die, poison. It was like, oh, haha, now you were like, they like spiked it with like psychedelic mushrooms or whatever.
Right.
But I had this list of drinks, and I didn't. Something came up that week, and I didn't have time. But my intention was to have all of those drinks there for the party to choose from. Because I'm huge into mixology, and that whole like I wanted to blend that element. I know a lot of D&D groups who like they make custom potion drinks for their party.
Oh yeah, yeah.
A friend of mine had like a dungeon that was full of like special potions he had made, and so he had like what the potion of speed or whatever was like his own cold brew that he made mixed with something else to make it a little sweeter. Stuff like that. No, I think it's a great idea, and marrying that is wonderful.
Yeah.
I love the idea of everyone at the table's eidolon being the beer they ordered. That's incredible.
Oh, it was great, and like it felt like a because you give the other players permission to interpret your character through that eidolon, right? So you could share this drink with them, and they'd be like, "Right, I get it. You're you know." Dark and bitter, but a little smoky, right? Like, and you can kind of see the character that comes out of that, right? You could just, no, that's that was a lot of fun.
I'm definitely gonna have to do that. Another one we've done is Red Dragon Inn.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes,
we turned that into a drinking game. It was great. It was we had been to the Ren Fair, so like everyone had like tankards and mugs and stuff like that we were drinking out of. Ton of fun. Mixing alcohol and fantasy gaming is sometimes great, sometimes awful. It ends up pretty good.
So I do have a tankard. Brings me around. What is the top of a tankard for?
The
lid. Yeah.
So I was researching this a while back, and I don't remember if I ever found a concrete answer.
Oh, okay.
Other than to prevent stuff from getting in your beer.
Okay. That makes sense.
It's really not a thing anymore. It's more of an old school style. I imagine when times were dirtier and more rowdy. So like, because it doesn't like shut, it doesn't clasp, and even if it did, it wouldn't keep alcohol in. So
right.
Like, I think that's what it was for.
I mean, like if it's one of those eras where people threw their sewage out the window, I would want a lid on my drink as well. That's, I was just wondering if it was like because sometimes these things evolve to just better present the, like hold in some sort of smell or aromatic, as you say. I guess aromatic is a much more pleasant word than smell when you discuss that. But yeah.
As far as I know, it's just to keep stuff from getting in it.
Excellent.
Because I've got one tankard with a lid. It was right behind me. It was like the something from BlizzCon. It was like a 15-year, 30-year something anniversary for Blizzard or whatever. They had the tankard. And we've got it somewhere around here. But all my other ones, I've got a lot of like stoneware mugs that just totally open on top.
Nice.
So yeah, I think it's just a thing that's now decorative.
Yeah.
Yep.
Used to have a purpose.
Used to. Not much anymore. A lot of glassware is like that now.
Yeah.
Anything else?
What's that?
Anything else? Any other questions you have?
No, I think I got a school in. I know now that the two main differences are lager and ale, and they're about temperature and the type of yeast that you're using.
The temperature you ferment it at.
Yes, the temperature you ferment it at. And then a Pilsner is a type of lager?
Yep.
Yes, okay. I'm just trying to recall some of the trivia that I know. And I learned about sour beers. I've learned quite a bit. And I want to thank you so much for that.
Oh, good. I'm happy to help.
Yeah.
The insane thing is we barely scratch the surface when it comes.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
But you now know more than most people. So
that's great.
Yeah.
So do you have like a place where people can find you online?
Yeah. So if you want, you can check me out on Twitter at DM_LSP. I rarely talk about beer there. Mostly I rant about role-playing games and indie games in particular. I talk about a lot. I'm also the host of the Nerds on a Roll podcast.
Nice.
We're an actual play podcast of Masks, which is a sort of teenage superhero hack of Apocalypse World, and it's by Brennan Conway, published by Magpie Games. That's where I do most of my stuff.
Cool.
I mean, I run that game. We got like 40 episodes out now. We put out one every other week.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm try playing some
like a long-going game. That's good.
Yeah. So that's about to wrap up. Actually, I think we're gonna we're on like episode 38 or something. It wraps up. We haven't like finalized all the editing, so it's gonna wrap up somewhere between episode 40 and episode 45. And then we're gonna play some indie games for a bit, and then we're gonna jump into season 2, which is again kind of this is actually how I found you. I was doing I remember now. I was doing sword and sorcery research because season 2 is. It was going to be Sword and Sorcery, and then I realized like that doesn't make great for long-term listening because Sword and Sorcery tends to be really episodic.
Mm-hmm.
So we're borrowing heavily from Sword and Sorcery and going more dark heroic fantasy.
Cool.
For season 2, but yeah, it was funny because we're gonna do Dungeon World, and I found Swords Without Master, and I went to my producer. I was like, "Can we do this instead?" And we ended up being like. It's just we don't know. We'd have to try it first, and we're already like kind of in the middle of doing things.
Yeah.
So. But I really am looking forward to playing it. It is incredible, and not to just like heap. Reading that was probably one of the best RPGs I've ever like just read as an experience.
Shucks.
I had a conversation with someone the other day on Twitter, not to go on yet another tangent, but about how important language is. Used to tell the rules, and at no point reading that did it feel like I was reading a rule book. It was like just this really cool sword and sorcery adventure tangential to some rules. It was awesome. But anyway, that's where you can find me. So DM_LSP and Nerds on a Roll.
Excellent. And I'm Eppidiah Ravachol. You can find me at Eppidiah on Twitter. If you're watching this, odds are you know where to find me.
Yeah.
I could put more stuff down below in the link. Oh my god, I did the thing where I pointed at the I broke the fourth wall. Apologies to my audience. Thank you so much for taking your time and telling me about beer. Now I am going to drink as a wiser consumer of this fine beverage.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, sir.
Bye.
Bye.